When we talk about digital transformation for cities and for businesses, the biggest challenge is to educate the people.
Olá, eu estou aqui com Walter Fang e ele é vice-presidente da empresa de tecnologia iSoftStone. E claro, você pode acompanhar o Brasil nas redes sociais, @canal Brasil no Facebook e no Instagram. Mr. Fang, thank you very much for being here, talking to us.
Thank you. It is my great honor and pleasure to be
It's
interviewed.
our pleasure. Mr. Fang, technology can boost development and national integration. And Brazil is a large country, like China, but the internet there in Brazil is very expensive, and in some regions almost non-existent. How important for the development of a country and infrastructure network?
It is extremely important. If I can quote Michael Porter, who talks about the prosperity of a region or a country, as you know that he is a master for competitive strategies. And he said that to develop the regional prosperity, you got to have productivity. And productivity came from innovation. But you need to have the basic infrastructure, and the innovation is basically driven by technologies, especially today. The internet, or behind the internet, the digital technologies, such as cloud computing, big data, mobility, even Internet of Things, as well as artificial intelligence. All these technologies will drive productivity, drive productivity or competitiveness, and the productivity will foster or make the region, the country prosperous. But to have all these technologies usable by a majority of people as well as the businesses, you need to build a modern infrastructure. I know that we talk about infrastructure, normally we talk about the road, the bridge, the pipes, communication pipes, the network. So the modern technology, the communications network, is extremely important. In Brazil, I know that you're very resourceful. After all, Brazil is the largest economy in Latin America. Your economy is driven by exportation of very good resources. Now you should have, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, you should use the income to build up modern infrastructure, such as we now in the 4G, and pretty soon we'll have the 5G. And with this modern communications network, including the wireless Wi-Fi, and also the network will enable the Internet of Things, such as the NB-IoT, the narrowband Internet of Things, and that will enable the installation of very many sensors, many of the cameras, many of the mobile devices, and collect the data and use the data to drive better decisions for the decision maker, for the businesses, and to provide convenience for the citizens. And all of this will drive productivity. And I said productivity will drive prosperity.
Brazil's government announced a large program of privatizations, the energy sector, railroads, roads, airports. Do you think the Chinese investors will be willing to participate in this program of privatizations? And if your answer is yes, which sectors do you think that it will be more attractive for Chinese investors?
I think your assessment is quite right on. I think you may have heard that the Chinese government has proposed the One Belt, One Road initiative, or Belt and Road initiative. Even though the modern days Silk Road or Maritime Silk Road is focusing on the China, the Asia and the Europe corridor, as well as the South Asia. Brazil is definitely in South America, far from China, but the spirit of Belt and Road is really to export the excessive production capacities of China, and also to improve or to encourage the connectivities between people, between businesses, and of course between governments. So I think with that initiative, many of the Chinese enterprises in many sectors would be willing and would like to go out of China to invest in Brazil. I know that we have been investing in Brazil, mostly in the natural resources arena. But in the new decade, I think the Chinese firms will be very interested in, you talk about the energy sector, especially renewable or green energy, even in the basic constructions, for example, the railroads, the harbors, the bridges, the highways. And China has been doing very good in this area. China's construction has been quite advanced. So we are building all of this around the world. But coming back to my industry, which is called information and communications technologies or software and services business, we are also very, very much like to collaborate with the enterprises in Brazil and to work together. I gave a talk 2 days ago when the distinguished delegation visited my company, iSoftStone, to talk about let's collaborate to build a better, a more beautiful tomorrow. After all, we're living in a small global village. It's like global warming, to use the resources more efficiently, to have inclusive development, to make the government even more efficient as a service government, to help the people, to help the business. It's a global issue. It's not just China or any other countries. And I think we can work together, and we will be very happy to work with the local Brazilian companies together in smart cities and digital transformation of businesses and cities.
Yeah, you mentioned the One Belt and One Road strategy or initiative. It's a pretty recent kind of policy. I think that's 2013.
2013, yes, you're right, proposed by President Xi Jinping. Yes.
Yeah, and I think there's more than 60 countries involved, but all of them in Eurasia, I think so.
I think so.
And South America is pretty far from here. It's the other side of the planet. I'm still feeling the jet lag of my trip. But do you think that's not a hindrance for Brazil and other South American countries to be included inside?
Yeah, I think, as I said, we're living in a very small global village, and globalization cannot be reversed. Of course, globalization also needs to recognize the local requirements. So the better term is called localization. On one hand, to be global, on the other hand, to be local, to really meet the local requirements and work together. So I don't believe, thanks to the internet, as you mentioned, thanks to the technologies, I think the people are much closer, even though we are far away from each other, separated by the Pacific Ocean and so on. We are still close, and that is why the spirit of Belt and Road is really the spirit of connecting people of both regions, or all the regions, all the people in the different continents, and we work together. I think today we are seeing the upcoming BRICS countries meeting, so even as far as Africa and so on, we should be able to work together.
Mr. Fang, I suppose you are aware of the economic crisis of Brazil in the last few years. Do you think that Chinese investors will be afraid to invest in Brazil nowadays, or Chinese government and investors, they prefer to look at long-term relations between this country? So there's no problem at this point of time, Brazil is in crisis, but it will be Brazil as usual in the near future. What do you think about it?
Actually, I'm more optimistic. I think if you look back in 2008, we have facing the financial crisis around the world, not just Brazil, not just South America, but also even in China. Fortunately, I read about the Brazilian's GDP has come out from the bottom and start to show some lights. For example, the first quarter of this year, the GDP growth is around 1%, even though it's a small number, but it is definitely a growth phase of the economy. I think the investment from the Chinese enterprises, including ourselves, we're always looking at the longer term. Okay, we definitely have to judge the capacity, how much we can invest. But I think in the smart cities and in some of the projects that I'm familiar with, we are using something called the PPP model, the public-private partnership model. And also, it's not only one company working on huge projects in the smart cities. We are working together in an ecosystem. For example, we're working with some companies like Huawei, who are already in Brazil, much ahead of the time that we have been trying to get into these remote countries. So we are a long-term partner with Huawei, and also because the business sectors that we focus on, they are very much in the ICT infrastructure, and our company is working mainly on the end-use industry solutions or applications. So two of us together will offer the end-to-end comprehensive, complete solutions. And we can go together to Brazil and also working with, very important, to work with the local companies and work together in the areas that you mentioned.
Yeah, you mentioned, Mr. Fang, the concept of a smart city. And your company is one of the leading enterprises in this. But what is a smart city? It's a new idea there in Brazil. It's not some kind of concept that is very known there. What is a smart city?
Well, in a nutshell, we talk about digital transformation. We can look at the smart cities as the digital transformation of cities, like the digital transformation for businesses. The objectives of smart cities is to exploit or use technologies, especially the ICT technologies or digital technologies, to provide better citizen services, to upgrade, to modernize the industries so that we have more sustainable, more long-term business or economic growth. At the same time, we use the technology to have more efficient, more sustainable energy resources usage and reduce waste, reduce pollutant. So, and last but not least, to provide better city services or city governance. So, from the economic perspective, how to upgrade, how to modernize the industries or businesses, how to provide citizen services to be more service-oriented, to provide more convenient services for citizens, such as smart transportation, smart living, and so on, and to be more environmental friendly, to have more sustainable natural resources usage and reduce waste, recycling, and so on. And last but not least, to provide better city management or city governance. So these are the objectives of smart cities. If you heard or you know about the Sustainable Growth Goals, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals from UN, this is very much aligned with that goals, the 17 goals of SDG from UN. And behind this is to use the latest or the modern technologies as an enabler to make all this happen.
Mr. Fang, some academics and even some people from some corporations are worried about down effect of the artificial intelligence in the labor market. governments can do something to mitigate we're talking about job destruction. I don't, of course, the services are better, but there's a kind of job destruction. What governments can do to mitigate this problem of, in the labor market?
I think very, very good question. I think artificial intelligence should be looked at as a tool. On one hand, artificial intelligence, the robots, will help to make the productivities, to make the automation even better.
I think that was Bill Gates. He told that robbers should pay taxes too.
That is a good suggestion. So if you look at just from a job market or from the work opportunity, the job opportunities or just employment rate, definitely the artificial intelligence will reduce the low-level position of jobs. If you look at the modern factories, there are lots of robots working in the factory. China has gone through that period, the last 30 decades. If you look at the factories in China over the last 30 years, there are a lot of workers in the assembly line to do very low-level assembly jobs. And those jobs should be replaced by robots. So the question is, how do we mitigate, how do we balance the two ends? I believe that we should attack the problem from both ends. On one hand, we need to create jobs for the lower skilled blue-collar workers, or the majority, the mass of the labor workforce. And there are still a lot of opportunities there. But on the other hand, we should use or leverage the artificial intelligence and build up the high-end, the more skilled workers. Even though the number of workers, the skilled workers or knowledge workers would be in a smaller number, but their production, their productivity, and artificial intelligence also can be looked at as intelligent assistance to these knowledge workers, to the designers, and to the management or the control of the process. So, for example, who manage the robots? You need knowledge workers. So that's my point. You need to look at, on one hand, the high end, the very high value, very knowledgeable workers. At the same time, you look at the mass of the lower level skills of workers, and then find a balance. And I believe that that's doable. That's very doable. So I think that's what in China, when I go to the remote cities, the remote areas, the inland of China, my suggestions to the local governments is the same. You need to look at both ends of the job opportunities. Don't look at just one end, because, as I said, productivity drives prosperity, and technology drives productivities. So if you look at only one side of the pendulum, will be imbalanced.
Yeah, and in regions like Latin America, there's the greatest part of the job market is occupied by people with a low qualification. In regions such as that, it's more of a challenge, this transformation, this revolution, technological revolution, isn't it, Mr. Fang?
Yes, indeed. I think that is why the education or in general, the talent development or human resources development is very, very much important, very important in this whole transformation. When we talk about digital transformation for cities and for businesses, the biggest challenge is to educate the people. We cannot forget that we must have inclusive development. The digital divide, the have and have not, we need to look at both ends and create very good education programs and have, you talk about the basic infrastructures, but use the communications, the ICT infrastructure to help even the people less fortunate or less educated people and bring them up. In this aspect, I think China, if you remember, China has successfully lifted millions of people out of under the poverty line and lift them up. And even today, we also have programs we call precision poverty alleviation program, and use technologies to address those group of less fortunate people and look at the root cause why they are under poverty line, what needs do they need, maybe a better job, maybe education, maybe something. But I think we continue to do that.
Mr. Fang, artificial intelligence and data technology has worried some peoples in what regards to privacy. Dissidents all over the world, including in China, are worried about this new kind of surveillance. What's your opinion on the subject?
I think
in a data-driven world,
yes,
governments
right.
Any government has
right.
more tools to.
Yes, I think this is a big subject in terms of today. Everybody talks about big data. Everybody talks about the big data as the new crude oil to produce, like, turn into value. But data is a kind of a virtual commodity. I use a very simple example. If I have $100, the money, if I use it, then it reduces and it's gone. Now, data is different. So if you use the data can it's virtual. So data can be repetitively used. So we need to look at the data, the ownership of the data versus the usage of the data is very different. I own $100. If you use my $100, I have gone, right? Yeah. The money is gone. But data is different. So we need to separate the issue between the data ownership and the data usage and the data access. And from that perspective, first of all, the security of the data it cannot be compromised. Cybersecurity or the data security is mandatory as a prerequisite. So when we talk about open data, it's a gradual, process. And second thing is that when related data, aggregation of data will create new value. So that's very different from the physical commodities. Now, after saying all of this, related to security, which talk about who can access the data, what can be accessed, it's very important to also look after people's privacy. And again, cannot be compromised. So the good thing is that we can use the data characteristics or the attribute to remove the identity of the people's identity and all the personal attributes, and just use the general characteristics of the relevant data and use that data for the right purpose. Okay. So net of this is that privacy cannot be compromised. Data ownership should be looked after, and data security is also the prerequisite when we're talking about how to utilize the data for better decisions, to have better insights.
And you mentioned earlier your enthusiasm with green energy and green technology. Do you think that Latin American countries should become players in the world regarding green energy and green technologies?
Absolutely. I think even though today South America, your neighboring country like Venezuela and so on, are very rich in terms of petroleum and things like that. But also you have the largest rainforest in the world. So I think, after all, as I said, we have only one globe. We have only one globe. So we need to focus very much as we develop, as economic development, learn from China. Like China has gone through a period of very rapid double-digit GDP growth, but sometimes at the expense or created some side effect, not so good impact on the environment. I believe that we have in the last 30 years, we have used too much of natural resources and produced some pollutions affecting the environment. So I think for Brazil, I think there's a lot of opportunity thanks to the new energies, technologies, the green energy or renewable energies technologies. We can continue to boost economic development while to be more friendly to the environment, to have smarter ways to use the natural resources.
Transportation, it's a huge problem in large cities like Pequim,
Beijing,
Shanghai,
yes.
or São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. What technology can do to transform this reality of the big cities?
Actually, we're improving, and again, use the technologies. For example, today, digital economy is also characterized by sharing economy, platform economy. So in terms of sharing economy, you see all the sharing bikes here in Beijing.
Yeah, it's an amazing project.
The sharing automobile and so on. So I think by better use of the data, the traffic pattern, and also try to have a very good innovative business model. For example, by car sharing, right? Yep. Or by sharing bikes. We reduce the number of cars on the road, for example. Also, the smarter ways to look at the traffic lights, the traffic patterns. Just before we have autonomous cars that they can drive themselves. Mm-hmm. Then all of this data behind the traffic pattern will reduce the congestions of the traffic. So I think in Brazil, you have already done this very good in one of the cities. Curitiba, I think that's the city.
Curitiba.
Curitiba, yeah. You have a very good rapid bus transportation. So that's doable. You already prove, you have a very good proof of this is doable.
Yeah. One last question, Mr. Fang. Chinese technological companies have a great relationship with universities. We are in the University of Beijing right now. In Brazil, there's a gap between university and industry. Do you think that it's something that Brazil should look at?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think because remember, the basic theme is that technologies drive innovation and productivity drives prosperity. Now, there are a lot of technologies. Companies like us, private businesses, they are more focused on the practical use of the technologies to apply that to solutions. However, there's a lot of R&D, research and development required. For example, in China, when we talk about we build environmental protection or monitoring and protection solutions, we work with the universities. They built Tsinghua University, Beida, just here. We leverage their capabilities to build a very good mathematical model because they have done a very good job in research. Mm-hmm. We're also working with foreign universities like MIT because they have a media lab, they have the city science, and they have experimented or proposed to do a better urban planning, because in the past, urban planning is done very narrow view, but the city is actually a very complicated organism. Not only that, when you do the city planning or urban planning, you need to look into, or you need to consider many factors: economic factors, the population distributions, the demographics, their lifestyle, and recreational, educational, healthcare, all of this together, and energy consumptions, the waste controls or waste management, and all of this should be the factors to plan a city. But after you do the first cut of the planning, city will change. Yeah. It is as if city has life. So we need to continue to use the sensors through the Internet of Things network to collect all this data and then continually monitoring how the city is growing or changing and make the urban planning adjustments accordingly. So I think coming back, it is very important to have the collaboration between the enterprises as well as the R&D and research academia communities. And so to take their research results and put to use or commercialize it and use that in the real life projects. So we are doing that. But again, it's not just the R&D or academia or research institutions. We talk about today we are living in a sharing economy, and we are living in, we need to have a very good ecosystem. So the financial institutions, the government, the private sector, business, the research and the academia, university, communities, and all we need to work together in an ecosystem.
Mr. Walter Fang, thank you very much for the interview. It was a
great pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.